The Empire of Britain, then still relatively small, became famous from the 16th century. But at the same time, Great Britain became famous for one extraordinary monastery. And exactly half a millennium ago, the whole of Europe was shaken by a terrible scandal concerning the inhabitants of the Littlemore convent in Oxfordshire, the county in England. So what exactly happened there? You'll find out the answer in this episode. Just before we begin, we're warning you, it's something eerie. And here it remains only to add that the disreputable story has been confirmed thanks to archaeological excavations made in our days, in 21st century. The remains of women were found, one of whom had her head broken, and the other was buried with a child. Right, that says a lot about this place. So back to the main question. What was going on here? Let's delve deeper into this. Littlemore Abbey will be discussed today on Flip Side of History. We begin. How did the monastery appear? The Littlemore convent was erected in Oxfordshire as early as in 1245. But the most untrivial thing is that even in the initial episodes of its biography, the spiritual atmosphere here was pretty far from ideal. We mean that from the very beginning the place became known as outright dangerous. Most likely the builders preferred to save on materials. After all, the first nuns who settled here had to pray every day for the basic ceiling to not fall on them. After that, poorly built place of worship began to be enshrouded by quite unpleasant rumors among the pilgrims. These pilgrims, wandering all over Britain, told everyone they met that the abbesses of the monastery offered pilgrims accommodation for the night, and then they were required to pay a considerable sum of money. Well, where could they go? What else could they do? It's not a want, it's a need. In fact, the lack of order was the number one reason in the list of motives for the indecent commercial activities of the sisters. But here, in this episode, the chronicling is mostly about the years of the peak development of violations of the monastic charter, the years 1517-1518. It was by then that the Pope of Rome and the King of the British Kingdoms, united by the Union, sent a certain bishop to the point. He was from the town named Lincoln. Let's touch upon the following chapter, Lustful Games of Nuns. The inspector from Lincoln, having become well informed about all the internal devilishness in a few days, came to the conclusion that the nuns were simply crazy in the sense of mental well-being, since from the conversations it turned out that in the premises of the convent, young inhabitants, almost girls, were playing with boys. And you can guess what we mean by the word playing between them. All of this happened in the convent itself. But there is more to it. There are known cases which were later widely distributed, firstly within Britain and then throughout Europe, when sisters engaged in obscenity with men from the nearest settlement as payment for the repair work. Accustomed to such things, the nuns gradually turned their convent into a professionally maintained brothel. And over time, the local villages became aware of what was going on here. It turns out that while the nuns were writing complaints about their, in this specific case, so-called place of worship, and their strict eldest sister, they were giving their amorous services in the right place for the whole of Littlemore. In the designated location, everyone knew the hardness of the abbess' heart. She ordered to put sinners, all those who had sexual intercourse with local men, in shackles. But the ladies who found themselves in poverty and in a room that was falling apart before their eyes were not ashamed of what they had been doing. Those who were so cruelly isolated, they freed, broke down the door and knocked down the shackles. And Catherine Wells, that by the way was the name of the main abbess, subjected her sisters to unpleasant physical punishments, many traces of which were traumas for life. Maybe because of this, many of the girls ended up in the graves, just like those with whom they sinned. Yes. But the most despicable thing is that despite all of these punishments, Catherine herself also had an illegitimate daughter from her lover, and this connection inspired her to a number of property crimes. Just look further. That aunt wanted to somehow stop what could no longer be stopped, the transformation of a godly place into a house of sinful joys. But the inspector saw little children everywhere. Well, Richard Hughes, the priest from Kent, did not hide from his guests anything at all, walking with his young daughter and who conceived her under very shameful circumstances. But a few days later, the bishop inspector was forced to formally summon the Mother Superior to court, and it indeed took place later in the city of Lincoln. But how did the abbess have such a power, since almost all the nuns within the abbey were against her? It turns out that she was the unofficial wife of a priest from Kent who had strong influence there. The property-related sins. This person, Catherine Wells, stole church property in order to provide her daughter with a good dowry. Of course, not the objects of art made of precious metals. You could get caught while giving them away, but the money received from the sale of stolen sacred objects. And later, realizing that they were no worse than their elder, the rest of the sisters began to sell other, already less valuable church utensils. And in general, the women foregathered in a small room, having rented out all the other sacred objects. Then it came to wine and even food supplies. They had to be sold in exchange for landscaping, firewood, and protection of the almshouse from the wrath of the people. This wrath had been accumulating since the 13th century. But if the seigneur had treated her subordinates well, then no one would have taken all these numerous objects out of the holy place. Only a surge in punishments caused a noisy reaction throughout the country. Evidence in our days. Researchers dug up 90 skeletons under the floor of the monastery church. 28 were male, 35 were female, and 29 of them were so scattered that their sex could not be determined. Among these artifacts, or rather bones, is the burial of a lady with a broken head. A woman was buried right there, and next to her the body of the baby was laid. There was also a rather mysterious burial of a girl presumably under 25 years old. She was laid face down. It is fully reliably known that in the Middle Ages this was done to the corpses of traitors or even, we can say, witches. What penalty awaited the guilty ones? The ordinary nuns complained of constant beatings and groundless cruel punishments. During the 8 years of running the convent, there were many complaints about the cruelty of the abbess, who, as you already know, herself had an extramarital affair with one of the priests who came from Kent. As a consequence of their unholy deeds, it was only in 1525 that the punishment overtook the young ladies, and it consisted only in the closure of the almshouse discussed above. But Catherine herself also received at least an annuity, 13 shillings and 4 pennies. At the trial, firstly, she denied any kinds of accusations against her. She, even from the occasion when she presented her beloved canon, a canon is a member of the main council of priests of a state, she did so with a small silver plate and chalice. Then she finally confessed, explaining that she had sold everything she could, but purely to feed and warm the poor nuns. She decided not to involve the priest in the proceedings, and decided not to mention that she loved him. It's not his own fault. And what about the simple sisters? It's totally unfair, but they did not receive any severance pay at all, in essence continuing to beg from ordinary civilians. What about the dead bodies that are very open traces of the monastery's own squabbles? Well, it can possibly be the fruit of the reaction of the God-fearing local population to everything that is happening there, a sort of reprisal for sinful behavior. The consequent fate of the monastery. After 1525, that scandalous trial, all the monastic buildings were in the hands of Cardinal Wolsey. The cardinal is the chief viceroy of the Pope in his country. This ambitious man planned to build a college on this foundation. He never fulfilled his intention for various reasons. So for a long time the complex remained abandoned, inhabited by memories. Only a few centuries later, in the only surviving object of the cult complex, in the annex, there appeared a pub under the name Priory, and misfortunes continued to envelop this place. In the year 2013, the said pub became the victim of an attack by a large alcoholic gang of football fans. And since then, this address has been of no curiosity. You are watching Flip Side of History, and in case if you found out something new or enjoyed watching this, then do not hesitate and leave a like and subscribe. And for now, see you in upcoming episodes.